This is Keith.
And this is Ben, and this is Main Street Lutherans. Keith is back with us this episode, and he did a great job with our interview with Pastor Imad Haddad, who's now a Reverend Doctor, I believe we can refer to him now as.
I think that is indeed true, yeah.
Excellent. So, as I promised in our last episode, in episode 36, that we would talk about the social message on Israel and the Palestinian conflict. But we sort of feel like we need to do an update on how we felt about that interview in episode 36. So Pastor Imad Haddad from Jordan pastored a church that is in the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Jordan and the Holy Land. That is, or in Jordan and the Holy Land, I believe. But so he was in the United States for a commencement. He received his doctorate of
Ministry from the United Lutheran Seminary.
Yes.
Which is kind of how, loosely, how we got connected with him, through someone that we know at the seminary. I mentioned Martin Otto Zimmern, who was on staff there, and he was the one that linked us with Pastor Imad, so that was very much appreciated.
Yes, and I believe, in fact, he is conducting a trip to the Holy Land here shortly. So we might be able to find a link for that trip before we publish, hopefully. Yeah.
So for people that think that the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the ELCA, is a mouthful of word salad, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Jordan and the Holy Land is even more. And
yes.
Yeah, and it actually has more words in its name than it has congregations.
That's right.
There are just 6 congregations in Jordan, in Jerusalem, and in the West Bank, and our guest, Imad, is pastor of one of them in Amman, Jordan.
And that's the only one in Jordan.
Right, yeah.
So the relationship between the ELCJHL and the ELCA, it was one of those things that I wanted to learn more about. I think our relationship is mostly through an initiative of the ELCA called Sumud, and its goals are accompaniment, advocacy, and awareness raising. And part of what I find interesting of that is when we talked with the ELCA Youth Gathering folks last year, those are the things that they talked about for the accompaniment day that's part of the gathering, which is they show the kids how to do accompaniment. So that is going out and doing work with people, advocacy, learning the issues and being able to speak about it, and awareness raising, just becoming aware of different things. And so I found that parallel kind of interesting.
Yeah. And, Imad spoke about, his sort of lived experience of that relationship with Sumud and the ELCA and their work with the Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land. And, he spoke of it in a fairly kind of a church oriented, congregationally oriented sort of thing. The idea of praying for one another, of visiting and having conversations, and just kind of being aware of what that lived reality is from both of our churches for the sake of the other. And I found that to be a really uplifting and helpful thing to hear.
Yes. And the other thing that I wanted to point out with this is that we have a relationship with them through the Lutheran World Federation as well as directly. And I think one of the things that we often forget as American Lutherans is that there are other Lutheran churches in the rest of the world, in Canada, for instance, but again, certainly in Europe, even though, say, in Germany, it's been combined a little bit differently. But the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land has relationships with those folks as well. So we're not the only ones in dialogue with those folks and trying to help them out, which I think is an important thing to note, especially in the times that we're in right now.
Yeah. And Sumud then is our unique ELCA initiative for the conducting of that relationship. But there are other Lutheran bodies around the world that, like you said, have their own relationships with them as well, and with one another. Yeah.
Now, as far as the interview went, we received a little bit of reactions to it. Nothing, all very good, really. What were your thoughts? What are your thoughts a bit out from that talk?
Gosh, I would say, just as I've experienced at different points in my life when I've had the opportunity to really delve into a deep, meaningful conversation with someone from a different culture, from a different part of the world, and just hear their perspective and hear both the similarities and the differences, certainly differences in their lived experience, but similarities in, the things that matter to them, the things they worry about, the things they're passionate about. And, there is so much similarity between, in the hour and a half that we were on the Zoom call together, between myself and Pastor Imad, and the things that he cares about are very much the same things that I care about, and I always appreciate that. It sometimes feels surprising, and yet it shouldn't be, because we are all part of the same human family. So that's the first thing that really strikes me. The second was then to be able to hear his experience of, what this, highly contested relationship between Israel and Palestine means for him in his own daily life, especially like, when he spoke about travel, when he wants to go back to Benjala to visit his family, or they want to come visit him, the process of going through checkpoints and the amount of time involved in that for a trip that without those barriers, and I'm not saying those barriers aren't there for good reason at times, but that without those barriers would take 2 hours in a car, and that it can be an all day experience just getting from point A to point B.
And
And
I
that,
think a point that jumped out was the humiliation involved.
yeah, yeah. And
That
the
well,
and the possibility that partway through it's just going to be shut down, and you're turned away and you say, no, you can't go today.
right.
Like, if for someone who lives in our part of the world, and let's say they do have a parent who is, I live in York. If my mother lived in Philadelphia, it'd be about the same distance. And, the idea that I could get partway there and then suddenly learn, no, you can't go through the rest of the way today. You just have to go home and try again tomorrow. That is that is literally so foreign to our experience as Americans to be somewhat shocking. And yeah, then adding on to that, the inconvenience is one thing, but the humiliation involved, having to defend yourself every step of the way, that you have a legitimate reason to be there, that you're not, smuggling contraband, that you're not smuggling weapons, that you're not trying to cause trouble, that you're just going to visit your family. Yeah, um, that's a shocking piece, I think, for some people to hear about.
Yeah. So what got us into all this was we were considering talking about something much more, I would say, boring, really, and basic, and that is a particular ELCA message, a social message on the on Israel and Palestine is how it's referred to. So, social message on Israel and Palestine from 1989, and
So it's one of the oldest social messages we have, given that our denomination was only formed in 1988.
yeah, and it's very it's very unique among those messages, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But what it tries to explain what the issues are in 1989 that are preventing peace at that point between the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, and Yasser Arafat and Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And it tries to explain those issues, and it's only a few pages. What is it? 4 pages, something like that.
4 pages, and they're small pages. They're like booklet size.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and the fourth page is like how to order it. So it doesn't even, you
and
know,
and the end notes.
that's right.
Yeah.
But, so it's short. And in the end, it tries to explain those issues, and then it asks members of the LCA to do two things. One of those is to educate ourselves, and the second one is to pray.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you made a comment when we started talking about this at first a few weeks ago that it has a very optimistic outlook on what is about to happen.
Yeah, at that point in history, we had not yet come to the Oslo Accords, as Pastor Imad mentioned, and it's the document. Sorry, I'm browsing through it at the moment, um, and it says at one point that pretty much that things are as bad as they could possibly get, and they can only get better. And here we go. I'm looking at the third page of the document, if anybody was pulling it up, right under article number 4. We recognize that resolving such a deep and complex conflict will involve lengthy, sustained negotiations, yet we are encouraged by the spreading recognition that perpetuation of the status quo will be increasingly detrimental to both sides, as well as to world peace. And then it lists a couple of specific items there to defend that position of cautious optimism. And apart from those specific bullet points that name specific moments in history, the document could very well have been written today. And yet, I don't know that anybody is more optimistic about peace coming to this region in 2025 than they were in 1989. And that's what stands out to me in reading this, that there's both a sort of a timelessness to it, and yet the the hope that this, I mean, it's not an overly pie in the sky positive kind of document, but the hope that it references in a couple of places certainly does not seem to have been realized, and doesn't seem to, that it's going to be realized anytime soon. That's the part that's a little deflating, I think, in reading it.
Yeah, and it's a bit, well, add a couple things to this. One is that on the page for it, the ELCA suggests reading a different document alongside it as part of it that is called, well, there was the 2009 ELCA strategy on the Middle East, labeled Peace Not War, Peace Not Walls, which has been now renamed Sumud. But I can't find, I haven't been able to find a copy of that document. I'm including a link to a video that's produced to go along with that to take a look at. But so we've issued more stuff about this, but they're not social messages and they're not social statements. They are, and to go back to what we talked about when we first talked about social messages and social statements, social messages are given to, they're produced by the ELCA church-wide organization, given to the ELCA Church Council, and that approves them. And so it does not need approval at the Senate, at the church-wide assembly. So it doesn't have the same standing as the social statements. And the social statements are asked for by the church-wide assembly, which happens every 3 years. It goes to the ELCA Church Council to make happen, and then Church Council asks the church-wide organization to make it. But then 3 years or 6 years later, it is approved by the church-wide assembly if they choose to. So it has more standing. It's been voted on by a greater representation of the church, and so they have two different classifications, but that neither of those things are. We don't. I'm looking at the list of social messages, and the one before this one in 1988 was on AIDS, and then in 1990 homelessness, end of life decisions in 1992, community violence, sexuality, immigration. These are not specific events in particular regions that name people individually and forces. And so this one stands out when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah, it's much more specific in both, kind of scope and the places that it names, and the and a point in history too. Yeah, despite what I said about it being a timeless document.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this one, and I wonder if that is part of the lessons that the church has learned. 1989 is, well, it's a long time ago. um, we, I think maybe we learned a lesson in that it's that the church issuing a message, for that matter, this would still have taken maybe 6 months to a year and a half to have produced, and the message that was probably asked for was different than the one that was needed by the end. And so, but I note that it doesn't ask our political wings, our folks who advocate in Congress or in the state legislatures for particular issues. It doesn't ask our church to make any actual stands in that way, just to pray and to educate ourselves, which sounds like maybe it is lacking in something there.
Yeah.
There is a social message on terrorism that comes later, and that's connected to the 9/11 attack. And its really only connection to that is that between these two is that asks, one of the questions that it tries to ask is, how do we Lutherans relate to Muslim people? Which would be a question that would come up in a dialogue about Israel and Palestine. But it talks about living in an age of terrorism and not so much naming individuals. So,
Right.
So we have one of the longest catechism questions we've had so far from our last episode, which was, what are ways to get involved in advocating for justice through the ELCA? And the answer, of course, was all of the above. And so we highly encourage you to join the ELCA e-advocacy network and invite local officials to your congregation's ministries and projects. So also, if you have a Lutheran state public policy office in your state, you can get involved with that. And you can contact the ELCA advocacy staff when you or a group, especially a youth group, are in Washington, D.C. for a visit. So you can do all that and more. I will also plug that ELCA Advocacy now has a podcast called Here I Pod, and it has information about different programs and different areas that we have advocacy for. I just listened to an episode about MMIW, missing and murdered Indigenous women, that is through our Native American program, and Vance Blackfox and his work there. So really good episode, and they've got stuff from Sumud and other areas as well. So good podcast. Look it up wherever your podcasts are found.
All right. Well, for this episode, our question is a throwback to the last episode in our interview with Pastor Imad Haddad. And the question is, what is the meaning of the word Sumud? Which you can find in that episode or on the ELCA's website.
We somehow avoided naming it today.
We did. Yeah. So what is the meaning of the word Sumud? Your options are steadfastness, faithfulness, smelling good, or is it an acronym for Special Undertaking for Mid-East Unifying Diplomacy? So you can respond to that by email, on social media, or to our telephone number, all of which are available in the episode notes. Main Street Lutherans is hosted by Keith Fair and Ben Fote, and the show is produced by Fote Media Productions. You can find all our contact information, links, and a transcript in the episode notes. And until next time, go in peace, serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God.